Press, we're glad you're watching. Thursday, the 6th of February. We now have a discussion at hand on the disaster preparedness. How well prepared is Kenya? Going by past experiences, Kenya has suffered, of course, loss of lives, property has been destroyed. And as far as checking on how prepared we have been to handle the various incidents, going by the terror attacks we've witnessed and others, that has not been handled very well. Still, a lot of criticism has come through in government's preparedness to handle those kind of situations. And today, that is what we're talking about. And I'm joined in studio by Fred Majua, who's a communications manager at the St. Ambulance, and also Rich Mallow, who is paramedic St. John Ambulance, England, to talk more about this. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning.
And thank you for coming to our show, being part of us this morning. We're talking about disaster preparedness. There are those who'd argue you can never quite be prepared in terms of just knowing when something will happen, things just happen. But when we're talking about disaster preparedness in its entirety, what are we talking about, Rich?
Okay, we always know that disasters are going to happen.
Yeah.
So we can always be prepared, but we have to have lots of joined up work. So with any country, that has to go from the top to the bottom, so that we've got seamless readiness and every organisation knows what to do and can respond in an efficient manner to any disaster that beholds us, whether that be a natural disaster, whether that be terrorism or anything else.
Because one would argue that so many kinds of things that we've seen happen, that could happen.
Yes.
So is it possible to always be at your A game in terms of ready for every particular kind of disaster possible?
Absolutely, because there's very common patterns between every disaster, and the main thing is about having the resources available,
right, and
being ready to save life when it needs to happen.
Okay, so there's a thread that connects this all. Majua, in terms of Kenya and what you've been able, of course, working with the St. John Ambulance, seen in the past years, what would you rate our preparedness?
I can say that we are on our way to be perfect in terms of disaster.
Perfect. That's a strong analysis.
Yes.
How is that?
Yeah, because there are a number of steps that each and every organization you can see putting in place to ensure that there are people who are equipped with the resources. They also have the relevant skills, so that whenever some of these disasters strike, we are not always caught napping. So I can see some progress going on in various agencies, including St. John Ambulance.
Okay, but many would dispute what you're saying completely. We are mostly caught napping, if not always. Tell me one particular one that we've been caught ready and in a few hours resolved, and that in response to the disaster, there's been a reduction in the numbers of lives lost and all other services required at those particular times, because the analysis and the reaction has always been, it's like when it happens is when everybody realizes, oh, water running out from the fire engines. We've seen that all the time. Yeah.
I think what has been the case is that many people have been looking at government to be the sole institution to be prepared about disaster. But taking cognizance of what disaster is, it means the preparation starts from an individual level. So whether somebody is at home or somebody is working in an office, that's where the disaster preparedness starts. So it's everybody's responsibility, though the greater extent of the responsibility lies with the government and the relevant agencies tasked with managing disasters.
Granted, it does begin with the individual, but I'll just put you a little bit more to task. In terms of the government, as you've said, a large part of it does lie at their doorstep. Have they played that role well?
Looking at what has happened in the past, the government is really trying, but they're not yet there.
I'm not buying the trying. Do you think so? You've been here, you've been able to look at the Kenyan situation in the past and the experiences. What are your thoughts?
Okay, Kenya is developing well in its preparedness, but there's still a lot more that can be done, and the government needs to provide an overarching strategy to make sure that all the organisations are pulling in the same direction. As Fred says, St. John has done a lot of work. We're over here teaching to prepare St. John. What I can't say is whether all organisations are working to that level in readiness for the next disaster.
For the UK, and in as far as how they're organized and prepared and set up with the various organizations and institutions, how ready usually will they be as your country when disaster does strike?
Okay, back at home, there's a lot of legislation which makes it a statutory requirement. We have something called the Civil Contingencies Act, which is a government act which is bought into by the government and then all the organisations. And to ensure that everyone is compliant, then we have regular exercising, testing, and the government has a responsibility to actually go in and monitor each organisation and test it to make sure that we can respond to the required level.
Okay, so legislation is put in place. There's always checking of the systems if they are working.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Do we have that in Kenya?
In Kenya, we are yet to be there, because at the moment we have put one legislation which is at the cabinet level, the Disaster Management Act, which is at cabinet level, and that's yet to be implemented. And then coming about checking and policies, us as stakeholders in the country came together and developed some standards and policies that could apply to all agencies that are involved in issues of emergency management. So there's a lot that we are learning from UK, and that's why we have reached around to come and share with us a few of the things that they do better on the other side in UK, so that we can use such kind of good practices to help us improve in Kenya.
All right, you've talked about that law that's pending. Would you tell us a little bit more about what it does say and does seek to do to ensure that in terms of preparedness, Kenya is better set?
So the law is talking about putting up an agency that is overall in charge of disaster management in the country.
Right.
At the moment, you know, that lies with several ministries. There's a special programs department handling disasters. We have drought management authority handling disasters. We have national disaster operations center, which is at different ministries. But the act is trying to put together all these agencies into one institution that will ensure there's more coordination and there's improvement in communication whenever disasters strike. The second, it also provides for funding, so that there is an express funding from the national budget. At the moment, you see, we're struggling to push in budgets for disaster preparedness.
Sure.
So those are some of the areas that the Act is trying to address.
Okay, I like that you've brought up two key areas. One, communication, because one we've witnessed from Westgate, information flow. You know, there were all manner of conflicting reports coming from the same, you know, senior officials and government security agencies that are meant really to be ensuring Kenyans are in the know in as far as what is happening. What must happen in coming up with communication strategies? What is key when we're talking disasters? It has happened, everybody is anxious, information is scanty, and there are people who usually are the authorities that have that, you know, platform to be able to talk to the citizenry and inform them what's happening. What is key for government officials, for the various stakeholders to work on in as far as communication is concerned?
It's always going to be difficult when a disaster is emerging.
Yeah.
There will be conflicting messages, but the government and all the agencies back at home sit round a strategic coordination centre. They link back to the scene, to the tactical commanders, to get that first-hand information, and then trying to join it up. So we give the whole of the country a balanced picture on the information as it develops.
Okay. So there's some consultation on all that are involved to make sure that it's the same script, they're reading from the same script.
Absolutely, and that goes back to the planning, so that everyone is working together in the same direction.
Okay.
And then the key is teamwork, because there's no one agency that can manage a disaster by itself.
Right, and we saw that they came together for Westgate. We saw a lot of the various security organs come together as one, but what we did not have was that common voice. Your evaluation of what we saw happen in managing Westgate, how would you evaluate that?
What happened is what Rich is talking about, the planning. Most of us are caught planning when the incident has already occurred, not prior to the occurrence of the disasters. So this is where sometimes we get ourselves on the offside. So it's an area that we yet to improve on, because in most occasions you find that the only efforts that has always put in place is either St. John and other agencies coming together, but there is the need of the overall government agency that is coordinating the efforts of each and every agency. So that's where coordination comes in. And if we plan to put coordination centers when these incidences occur prior to their occurrences, then we more better prepared. But if we wait for them to occur, you will find there are a lot of conflicting information, especially the time immediately after occurrence of these incidents. But after some times, you will find that because we were planning at the scene, maybe 1 or 2 days is when you will see a perfect coordination center put in place. So this is one of the areas that we yet to adjust from after learning from what our colleagues are doing in the UK.
Okay, and also the issue of funding, because sometimes, like what we're witnessing in Turkana, you know, many dying of hunger, drought has stricken again. The question of, we had Kenyans for Kenyans a while back, a campaign by people coming together to ensure that those fellow Kenyans are fed, but the putting together of funds, because some of this in management and in being prepared, then there needs to be a kitty, perhaps. So do you feel that such a disaster in itself, because it's tragic, it's happening, but it's something that could have been avoided?
Yeah, there have been public hearings put up by the Ministry of Treasury,
right,
to ensure that there is public participation in the process of budgeting. And we did place our proposal to them that there is need for provisions for, a good budget that can manage disaster. Because it's not only about putting plans on the paper and hoping that those plans will self-execute. It's about putting money aside to ensure that whenever these incidences occur, we execute them well. But looking at Kenya, it's very easy to predict some of these disasters, especially those which are caused by the impact of the climate, like drought. It's very easy to predict, and it's very easy to put in place long-term measures to ensure that they do not occur. Some of these require the participation of the local communities. Some of them may resist because it's a new thing, but over and above, it's always good for them to participate in such kind of preparedness. Not only prepare them in Nairobi and going to execute them at the local level. It's good to start from the local level so that they are all involved into it. They all understand what they need to do. They all understand the information they need to share with relevant agencies. And if all these are coordinated together, we shall be a prepared nation. Yeah,
and as you mentioned, preparedness is not just an issue that the government, you know, should be dealing with. It's everybody, and it's huge when you think about it, because it starts right from our homes. You know, we need to be prepared in the event anything happens, to our offices, to schools, to general public areas. What is key for the ordinary public, the general public, to keep in mind in as far as emergency situations are concerned? Let's begin with the home front.
Okay. I think the first thing is about a safe culture. And this extends both in the home, at work, on the roads, because actually prevention is much better than actually dealing with an incident when it occurs. But it's inevitable that accidents will occur, sudden illnesses. So each individual can get themselves ready by learning. And St. John provides first aid courses throughout the country. So individuals can learn first aid because seconds count in an emergency. There's always going to be a delay before help arrives. Those first few minutes are so critical. So learning the knowledge and skills from an organisation like St. John is absolutely vital. Having basic first aid kits in the house, so you've got the materials that you can actually help yourselves until help arrives. The other key thing is knowing how to get help. In Kenya, you don't appear to have a standard phone number. In England, it's very easy. It's one free phone number which accesses all the emergency services. A little harder here, and it's where England used to be, but having the emergency numbers so you can call St John within your mobile phone ready to dial, and all that makes you prepared as an individual for an instant when it happens.
Yeah, and what are some of those emergencies you'd say in the home front before we go to the larger scale of the country that people need to be more cautious of and even just go out of their way to be prepared for?
I think the first step, especially for people at home, is that they first need to at least assess the environments in which they live. So by doing that, they will know the risks that they are bound to face in the kind of environment that they are. And the second thing is to plan to prevent. So after they have planned to prevent, maybe if they stay in areas like Turkana where they know that there will be drought, then they plan to ensure that they put in place some irrigation measures so that whenever such droughts come, they're not caught with crop failures or things like that. And when it comes to maybe medical emergencies, then there is the need for learning. And there are several institutions, St. John is just one of them, that offers several training opportunities that people can take. And these trainings are not like brain surgery where somebody has to really struggle to learn. There are courses which take 6 hours, they take 1 day, and they rarely go more than 1 week. So one could just maybe preserve some time and ensure that they attend some of these key trainings that are offered across the country, so that they remain prepared. And the other bit of learning is learning from the previous incidences that we have always seen. You can see maybe there are areas which are always flooding, but you can easily predict that when the next rainy season comes, now we're talking of droughts, they will still be caught at the same place, because some people have refused to learn that they need to take serious some of the cautions that we give them to move from some of those risky areas. And the other bit is, some people rely too much on donor support, which is not at times a good measure. It's good to be self-sustenance. So most of the programs that we nowadays execute as St. John Ambulance is aimed at ensuring that there is sustainability in them. The individuals are able to do it alone without relying on any other person.
And I think you got it spot on by saying the biggest problem is that a majority of the people just don't seem to learn, from the government to ordinary, the public, members of the public, because you keep seeing some of these things happening over and over again, and the question is always that it wasn't an emergency, just didn't happen. We knew because it has happened in the past. But what I find interesting is that when disaster happens, and this is a conversation we've had as a country before, people tend to go to the scene of the incident instead of, you'd imagine the safest thing is run free, run for your life, be safe, but opposite happens. Do you witness that?
Yeah, and I think that's something about a desire to help. And natural curiosity.
Really? Curiosity is more like it. For some, yes, it is to help them.
But it really is not good. It hampers the emergency services, gets in the way of the workers, it causes extra traffic congestion. And what we would ask is for people to move away from the areas, because they're going to be much safer to move away. And I think this is where also the media, and we touched on this earlier, if you're able to give good, accurate reports from the scene, then people don't need to go to find out for themselves. Hopefully their curiosity is satisfied by looking at what you're able to provide, and then as you said earlier, the consistent messages. So we would very much encourage people to not go towards any sort of
Do you witness
incident.
that in the UK? Do people meal around?
We have the same problems, so it's just a human nature thing.
Okay.
But what we have improved upon is putting cordons in place to try and stop people.
Right.
But in the early stages of a disaster, we have exactly the same problem.
Okay. Yeah, because at Westgate, the police had to use tear gas to disperse, you know, the crowds, because even despite putting the cordons, they'd still come around and even go beyond the cordoned off areas. So it just happens all the time.
It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate, despite these people putting themselves on a lot of risk and exposing themselves, because the case we have in Kenya is very unique, most of it being terror attacks, where there's a possibility of a secondary attack.
Yes.
So it's even exposes the ordinary people so much. But we will not relent. We will always still advise them to keep off, even if they still refuse. We will continue to remind them that it's not safe for them to get to the scenes whenever these emergencies occur, because there's good coverage always when emergencies occur, and they can always sit at home and watch on TV or hear on the radios or any other forms of media. But I think the other thing that is also encouraging it is the evolution of the social media, where each and everybody is trying to be a reporter of himself, is trying to capture everything so that he can also report to his friends. And it also adds on the curiosity that Rich was talking about. So over and above, it's not safe for anybody to go to the scene unless he has the skills or he is necessary to be at the scene as a rescuer or maybe as one of the agencies that are required to be at the scene.
Okay. And in as far as, especially for the public offices and organizations, you know, like here, do you find that we put enough in place in terms of drills so that as much as there are signs, you know, gather here in case of a fire, in case of something, or you'll see the fire alarms around, but do most people even know, you know, what to do in case of a real emergency? Because very few offices will you find the drills actually taking place. In most cases, actually, when the alarm goes off, people are like, switch it off, it's, you know, it's too loud. You know, nobody's moved, they're just like, these people. But in essence, one day it could happen and you think it's a drill or something, and it's actually, you know, real alarm.
Yes, what we nowadays doing when it comes to drills with organization is we're trying to make it very real. We're trying to make it real even to hospitals, even to responders, because when we are doing these drills, we are not only testing the organization's response, but we are also testing the response of all the agencies charged with emergency services. And we're also testing, including the hospitals. So we try to make it very real by doing makeups that ensure that the people we remove from the scenes look like real casualties. And if it's fire, we use what looks like real fire. And at the moment in Kenya, it's a law that each and every organization must do at least a disaster in a single year, a disaster drill in a single year, so that they are always prepared about about what to do when disasters strike. And besides that, they also need to put in place certain materials like the firefighting equipment, like the first aid treatment equipment in place at workplace. So these are the things that we are testing. And I remember a time when we tested one of the organization, it confused even the hospitals. They started treating one of the makeup casualties until we told them, okay, this was just a drill. So we're trying to make it as real as possible. But at the same time, we know that when it's real, it also it can at times become a real situation, because some people may get injured in the process of trying to escape. And we do deliver for them reports on how they have performed in the drill, so that they can always improve. On it.
Let's talk about fire. We've seen quite a number of fires. One of the biggest, most recent, at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, and I was there, and one of the biggest challenge witnessed was the fire engines kept running out of water, so they were tens and tens of dozens of the fire engines coming and going. So whilst that could happen, the other challenge was that they did not seem to have enough pressure to reach the fire that was really high up and it was blazing. So it took a long time to be able to put out the fire. So as much as they have some of this equipment, there's also the question of, are we even prepared in magnitude of disasters? Because that was a big fire. It's at a very important institution in the country, but it took a very long time to put it out. Did you watch that?
Yes, I saw that on the television.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things, and you touched on it, it's also about individuals being prepared, knowing how to get out of buildings, but also to raise the alarm early. And those very basic things like sprinkler systems. The problem with fire, once it gets a real hold, it doesn't matter how many fire engines you've got, how much pressure of water, you're going to struggle to put it out. And looking at some of the buildings, we could probably do better in Kenya with that preparation, that prevention, because it's so difficult to stop fire once it's got a hold. Yeah,
so we definitely need to improve our water accessibility, and the pressure. I don't know what kind of equipment is needed, but that could reach higher buildings.
And it engages many agencies than what people look at, because when it comes to issues where we need water, the Nairobi Water and Sewer Company comes in. So you find Nairobi, at times there are areas which have rationing when it comes to supply of water. So at times you find the hydrants, the organizations have fixed the hydrants in place, but by the time disasters strike, you find that region is being rationed in terms of water. So that's why I talk of this need for multi-agency engagement to ensure that all agencies that deal with any activity, be it a road construction, be it a water supply, be it an electricity supply organization, we all need to plan together so that we can prevent this kind of disasters together. And this can only happen if we have a single government agency that coordinates all the disasters in the country.
Yeah, and we're yet to see a lot of that. We saw a few tweets off of Westgate from one of those organizations, but after that, even in terms of the information being put out, because the other thing is to raise that awareness. You're here now giving some of this information out, but the public and everybody else just being able to get information on what to do, and the numbers, as you mentioned, those emergency numbers to call that actually work, and also people not calling them to make fun or crazy jokes is important. So clearly one area that Kenya must improve on. Your parting shot as we wind up.
I think everyone needs to buy into it, from the government right down to every individual on the street, and starting with the schools. Because if we embed a safety culture, readiness in the schools as part of the curriculum, teaching them first aid, then they're the citizens of the future, and that will develop Kenya to be a much safer and ready place.
Yeah. Finally.
The other thing that I think the government needs to look into is in the area of supporting agencies that have always been participating in emergencies. Just like in UK, the government supports emergency service organization, especially in compensation whenever they have done some perfect rescues, just to encourage them to put in more resources and put in more training to ensure that the future disasters are better managed. So this can happen in our country here as well, if we copy a little from what happens in UK. So but it does not overrule the fact that disaster preparedness starts at individual level, and each and every person has something to do by himself before putting a blame on another institution. All
right, well said. Each has a role to play. The back also does top with us as individuals. Thank you. Fred Majua, Communications Manager, St. John Ambulance, Rich Mallow, Paramedic St. John Ambulance, England. We appreciate you for being with us and sharing that information with our viewers this morning.